saw a guy in overalls coming in by a box and a bag, and I was like, this is true Americana.
This is what America's really about.
Guns, butter, and tobacco.
So welcome to the podcast, everyone.
We're just going to have that be the entire cold intro. It's that preceding
2.5 minutes.
Yeah.
Well, hi everyone. Welcome back. It is March 23rd.
Yep.
It's around noon.
Yep.
We have a lot to cover. It's been about a week, 2 weeks.
Yeah,
since
actually,
we've been
we're
here.
kind of on. Well, we're
A
a little
more on
off,
track.
but we're not as off as we've been.
Exactly.
previously.
Yeah. We have Ben back with us.
Hello.
For our 18th episode.
Yep.
Of the title. Insert here.
Yeah. We'll cut it in later.
So anyways, this podcast will be covering some Midwest topics of Kansas Medicaid expansion, Missouri charter schools. In our national topics, we'll be talking about how the Mueller report was released.
Yeah.
And then we have a lot of international news to cover because the world doesn't sleep when we do.
Yeah. In fact, a lot of them are actually awake when we're asleep.
Yes. Because
Yeah,
the
that
sun
works.
still doesn't set on the French Empire.
Right. So yeah, we're gonna bounce back and forth from here to there. And
It actually doesn't. Like, that's a real thing.
I think everyone be excited. I think this is the week we actually
Talk about Brexit.
Yeah, we open with the fact we're talking about Brexit. We're probably gonna get to it.
So, without further ado.
Let's get
Are
it.
we still on this?
Yeah. Rehashing that. So yeah, the first topic we're getting to today is New Zealand. As most of you are probably familiar, last week, 2 weeks ago, there was a mass shooting in New Zealand at a mosque. 50 people, I think, was the final.
The total death count.
Yeah, it was the total death count when everything was said and done. Now, as Americans, we're all too familiar with what this is like. I mean, the Islamophobia aspect of it, the mass shooting aspect of it. What we're not familiar with is the New Zealand governmental response, or the New Zealand's government's response to this, which was within 24 hours they passed legislation banning military-style firearms.
All semi-automatic
Yeah.
weapons.
Yeah.
Which will take place on the 11th of April. The ban will be in place.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, no, this is something that's been modeled. Their New Zealand's neighbor, Australia,
yeah.
after a mass shooting back in 1990.
It's 97.
98, I thought. It was around then.
Yeah, I mean,
the late 90s, they
it was-
had a mass shooting
Yeah.
in which I think it was like 36 people were killed. And they soon after, it was like a week or two after, they basically banned all firearms. And so New Zealand is following suit. New Zealand, basically, to cover this, is an island nation. It's a homogenous society. They have a parliamentary system, which means the government can be far more efficient. But there's only 4.7 million people that live there. Not a very large place. Their capital is Wellington. The shooting took place in a town called Christchurch, which is kind of confusing because the shooting took place in two separate mosques there.
Yeah. I mean, Christchurch is one of their biggest cities, and to the extent of it's a homogenous society or a homogenous country, I think one of the interesting things about New Zealand and Australia specifically is, as we've seen with all of the emigration out of the Middle East, Australia was in the news for a while about their inability or lack of enthusiasm in terms of taking immigrants, and they set up, coincidentally, the country that was founded as a prison island established its own prison islands to send immigrants. And New Zealand kind of had to deal with some similar issues in terms of there are conservative parts of this country that don't want to accept immigrants. They're still very nationalist. And there are other factions within the country that, want to reconcile these things. And I think one of the interesting things, again, comparing it to America and the things we've been going through, there are components of Islamophobia present in this part of the world too. Why the senator from Australia recently made headlines when he got an egg smashed.
Oh
over
yeah,
his head.
because he blamed this whole shooting on immigration.
On immigrants and Islamophobia and all these kinds of things. And so, their problems aren't too indifferent, but the reaction, I think, makes the world of difference in that these are people who recognize that, hey, here's a problem, and it's government's role to...
Drastic problems require drastic solutions.
Well, I don't even think this is a drastic solution. It's just, okay, people can't have these weapons.
Well,
There's
I mean,
no
like,
reason to have them.
From the context of America, it's certainly a drastic solution.
Yeah, I'm most curious to see how they actually go about implementing this. Yeah. And whether they're mandating people to turn over their firearms.
I think it's a buyback.
That
so
makes
you
more
have to
sense.
give them up,
Yeah.
and then the government will compensate you for them.
Yeah.
Of course, I don't know at what rate that is.
See,
Yeah,
I
we'll see.
wish we did a cash for clunkers type thing with firearms in this country, where people can voluntarily turn in their firearms.
See, the problem in this
Well,
country,
they-
though,
we
is
do-
there are more firearms than there are people.
We have, but
So
we have done this before. There
It's
are
not
programs
unprecedented.
set up and I know Chicago did this a while ago,
Yeah.
where they do have these basically these places where people can dump malfunctioned firearms, like places things that are outdated,
Yeah.
dangerous, or illegal, which is kind
I
of
wanna say a
questionable
part
at
of it
times.
was
But
if you can, they would buy back unregistered ones.
Yeah.
If you had those, then you could just give them up.
About St.
Yeah.
Louis and Chicago.
Yeah.
I've seen those
They've done
programs.
those. Actually, one thing about the New Zealand about this country mourning and reconciling with this horrific shooting is New Zealand is known culturally for the rest of the world. A lot of for the Morai Haka, which is that ceremonial dance that they do. Which most notably the New Zealand rugby team does before matches. I read a report that the BBC put out about how at these places of mourning and these not shrines but these memorials set up for the victims, they have had just the communities doing the haka together with at these places, and it's been a very moving and quite cool thing to see. I watched. They posted a video of the whole community doing this haka, which is a very passionate dance, which is it's what haka means in Morai. So, but I don't know, something really cool. It's
been
very
nice to
moving.
see. It's been restoring some of your faith in humanity to see how that country has come together to try to tackle this issue and reconcile with land.
Yeah.
I mean, I was reading articles over the past week about how different disparate groups have come together and tried to either protect or unify with the Muslim community. Something about their one of the biker gangs in there is going and protecting mosques on a volunteer basis.
Yeah.
Which was really cool.
Yeah, the mosque one of the mosques where the shooting happened reopened the other day, and people from the community just came and linked arms and stood around it, made a ring around it. I mean, it's a show of solidarity. They're not making the police line or anything,
No.
but. It's one of those crazy things of, okay, this is a country of 5 million people. The country itself has a smaller population than the state of Missouri, to put it into reference for people. But
The nation itself is the size of Rhode Island. How big is it?
yeah, I mean, it's a
Not Rhode
very
Island,
small
no.
country, but
That's
again, it's impressive that this is a community that recognizes its problems and is able to come together. And
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of reasons for that you could get into from a sociological standpoint that we probably won't explore. But again, to your point, it is nice to know that humanity exists somewhere out there in the world.
Yeah. So moving, but maintaining in the southern
much larger than
hemisphere.
Rhode Island.
Yeah, no. There was this also occurred last week, but this story hasn't gotten much coverage. But a massive cyclone, cyclone Ida,
Yeah.
I think is the
Good luck
name
with
there.
that one.
Yeah, tore through southern Africa about a week ago and has caused insane amounts of flooding. It hit Mozambique the hardest, and at least 417 people have now been declared dead. However, there's still upwards of 700 that are missing all across this country. There's the floodwaters are still expected to rise. This has also affected Zimbabwe and Malawi, which are also on the coast there. However, I mean, the UN's response has been pretty all right, but there are still thousands of people trapped in the floodwaters that do not have access to clean drinking water, most likely food, because a lot of them are going to start receiving some food supplies. However, in places where you rely so much heavily on communications that might have been damaged or taken out at this point, that there is so much devastation that could have occurred that there probably a large amount of there's still I think 500,000 people have been displaced because of this, and no doubt that there will have to be some massive coordinated efforts to keep still many hundreds of people alive that will otherwise not if such international responses are not well coordinated.
Yeah, this is one of those events, and when you look at the pictures and the videos and everything, and it's very reminiscent of when you're looking at New Orleans when Katrina happened, or Houston when the cyclone hit, or the hurricane hit down there, Costa Rica and Puerto Rico even. But it's then compounded by the fact that Mozambique is not a wealthy country, does not have ties directly to wealthy countries. This is a country that was also, or previously, very dependent on foreign aid. And so when you have these just impoverished places being absolutely demolished like this, I mean, this is something that is going to affect the next generation of people for Mozambique having to rebuild and everything like this. And
Yeah.
we can all take comfort in the fact that America will not play a role in this at all because we don't help people anymore.
I mean, I think back in 2005, I think was the year when Indonesia was hit by a massive tsunami.
Yeah.
I think that honestly, like, that's what it reminds me most of, because there's so many. I guess it's not even this. It's just that this land that has been destroyed is also farmland, which means that famine will be rampant. And of course, like we also play this, kind of privileged role in being able to be like, oh, look at this really poor developing country. Like this, how much they're going to struggle because of this. Like kind of how this light is taken. But I think that we hope to see the African Union will probably play a major role in the reconstruction of Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and Malawi.
Yeah.
And this is something we can also definitely get into at a later point, but a lot of these countries do have very direct ties to their former colonial powers. Mozambique was a British colony. I think it was a German and then British colony. Zimbabwe's British because it was the former Rhodesia. And then Malawi, it was Northern Rhodesia.
I don't know, Rhodesia is just such an interesting concept.
Yeah. And then
Rhodesia as a concept.
Yeah, but no, I mean it's just interesting stuff. But with like the aid and that kind of thing that they have tied to is always. Oh no, I take that back. They were also Mozambique was also Rhodesia because they were northern, and then Zimbabwe was southern Rhodesia.
Gotcha.
Anyways,
by no means do I want to.
No, because they were Portuguese. They were not English. Excuse me. And the Portuguese.
We're hitting all the.
Oh, I know. I really messed this one up. No, but the Portuguese. Any Portuguese former colony is actually one of the worst off because the Portuguese had to literally fight tooth and nail to maintain their powers in 1974. I think was when they gained independence. No, 1975. But they started basically a civil war in 1972. There. Which led to a horrific and bloody war for 3 years.
That's rough, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's pretty awful. And because of that kind of end, Portugal, of course, is not a country that oftentimes reaches out and helps. So it's
going
pretty
to the
awful.
point of their ties to their former colonial powers, Mozambique's kind of
fucked.
I mean, yeah, it's going to be, they're going to be dependent on their regional connections and things like that. I think the lessons for us to take away from this. It's funny you're talking about there's this huge flooding in the farmlands that are affected. First of all, this is going to teach us a lot about reconciliation of climate change and how we're going to have to face the
almost
changes.
like the weather's getting worse.
Yeah, and we're only going to see more of this.
Who would have guessed that?
More dramatic lowland flooding.
Major lowland flooding on the east coast of Africa. Also major lowland flooding in central United States.
Yeah, exactly. In Nebraska, where, the Midwest has had a bunch of problems due to all the storms lately and the flooding that's going on there. And
the state there is underwater. Now, albeit it's difficult to equate those two situations because Nebraska will be. I have a feeling will fare better.
They will rebuild. Yeah, if they needed to, Nebraska could just go full Holland on the rain and just.
We're gonna lift.
Yeah, we can lift Nebraska out of the ground. We have the resources to be able to do that, and who knows? Maybe we'll even reinvigorate the CCC to get the economy to jumpstart the economy. But
ironically, I was just in SEMA last week, touring it in Missouri to see how they would respond to flooding. And while I was sitting there, he goes, "Yeah, we're starting to see some kind of serious flooding up here in Nebraska. We'll see how that pans out."
Yeah. So this is one of those things of where we can look at it in Mozambique now, we can look at it in Nebraska, but these are the future problems we're going to have to tackle: is how we as a society
deal with mass weather events on an annual basis.
Yeah,
this is not going to stop,
basis.
and it's not going to stop, and it's likely going to get worse.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Everywhere.
Oh yeah. Moving on. Above the equator, headed to the Middle East now, because the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces, or SDF, as it is also known, fighting in Syria, these rebel forces fighting ISIS, have stated that the Islamic State group, for over 5 years, their caliphate reigned in many areas, but it is now with the destruction, with the military victory of the last ISIS held territory officially. That ISIS's land claim, as the Islamic State's land claim to any part of Syria or Iraq, is now over.
Yeah.
Which is a major.
We won, guys. Mission accomplished. Bring out the banner. Bring out.
Pack it in, folks. We're going home.
Well, okay, real quick. Though.
This is.
I don't think that this is any. This is a great victory, though, considering that ISIS once controlled 34,000 like square miles of territory all across Syria and Iraq, and now they control absolutely none.
Well, I don't want to belittle that fact that we've eliminated their territorial dominance in that area, but
Right.
but the point of this whole discussion is, it seems like a facetious discussion. This problem's not going to go away.
No.
There's still tens of thousands of fighters still scattered throughout the region.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
I mean, it's almost like in a progression of our approach to the Middle East, we've just gone even more fundamental than we started with. Because if you look back to like, we won't go to the beginning. We'll go to like the Gulf Wars, for instance. When our thought process was, we will get rid of the autocratic regime and we will attempt to instill democracy, and that will
And
stabilize the
democracy
region.
will thrive.
Yeah, and we saw over the course of however long the war on terror has now lasted that it's not that
Democracy is a
simple.
difficult plant to grow.
It really is. So now we've even reduced it. So we're declaring victory of now that this group doesn't have any land holdings, which, don't get me wrong, that's an incredible achievement because
I'm glad people aren't living under the threat, at least, of a major power.
But I mean, as Adam stated, they once held and controlled a large part of this region, and we've managed to, American forces with Syrian Democratic forces have been successful in eradicating that. Now, as we were discussing earlier, I think we are long past the point of where non-state actors need territory to be legitimate. I think we see
agree.
that things like the Caliphate, things like Al-Qaeda even, are still non-state actors and legitimate ones.
Yeah.
And they don't hold
They are
any
a
territory.
consistent specter of terror and violence throughout the region, throughout the world.
Yeah. And so whether they're a side effect of
I think what
the
gets
instability
lost,
or if they're a cause of it.
I think what gets lost in the sauce, I guess, or lost in this discussion of, all right, we've beaten back the caliphate in Syria and the Levant, is that like this has to be a consistent thing we fight against for on a yearly basis for the rest of our lives. Like the battle against hate and terrorism is something that doesn't end. It's something you deal with and will continue to deal with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this will. I don't know. To me,
I just don't want people to think that it's over now. We can
of course
we can
not.
stop worrying about this problem.
Yeah.
I think that, and this is interesting because there's a tie, and I think a good discussion about like the role of the internet and how this is played out. Because like ISIS, it's one of the earliest recruiting tools was using like Facebook and Twitter
Facebook,
and that
magazines.
kind of thing. Basically, but they used those ways of basically like branding themselves and like. Especially Reddit. We talk about how awful Reddit is at regulating this kind of shit. But even Facebook, because
even Facebook,
the New Zealand shooting was broadcasted on Facebook
broadcast
Live,
on Instagram Live, and
then
Facebook
also
Live.
Instagram and Reddit.
And it will never be gone.
No, but that's the thing is that like, I think that it's well worth having the discussion of how much these tech and media companies.
Once again, I get the discussion of how much can you tolerate intolerance.
Well, I just think that we need to start holding. I think we really need to hold these places, like these companies,
accountable. I mean, the philosophy is like, all right, we create the platform, you create the content. I appreciate the sentiment there, but there's a much larger discussion we have to reconcile.
Like you're not allowed to like. There are certain things that these companies do, like regulate really well, like any like child like pornography.
Whatnot,
all of that is fully illegal in the United States and is of course not shown. Copyrighted material is oftentimes taken out pretty quickly. Like there are certain
YouTube's
things.
really good about that.
Yeah, exactly. However, when it comes to like
when there's a monetary incentive behind it, they're really good at it.
Yeah.
But when the consequences of this are nebulous and will play out over years and years and decades, it's very hard to realize what small letting these terrible people get that platform.
I'm just saying we should slap $1 billion fine every time one of these things is posted.
Well, this is one of those interesting points where we get to this debate between
I want to say
free speech and not free speech, because we understand. I mean, there are black and white lines drawn with things like child pornography, with things that are directly related to morals and norms that we recognize as being incorrect. Hate speech is unfortunately still one of those nebulous things of where we have lines drawn, but there's a lot of gray areas. So, for instance, how can Facebook regulate this network that has grown well beyond their ability to control it? How can they get into people's private messages and see what they're saying there and things like that? Yeah, on a much broader scale, they can regulate the groups and the messages being sent out en masse, but on an individual basis, they have a difficult time. And I think right now, yeah, they're not incentivized to really control that behavior because it would be huge and costly for them to do so, and we don't have anything in place that says, hey, you are responsible for these things to happen.
What was the genocide that was being committed against the Rohingya? What country was that?
Burma. Burma.
A lot of that was spurred.
Myanmar.
Yeah, come on.
What's the difference?
But a lot of the sentiments from that were brought about by hate speech about the Rohingya on Facebook.
Yeah,
well, that's also because Facebook controls the entire internet of that country, which is crazy.
That's insane.
What, you don't want
a private company that run by a robot lizard man?
You don't want the free market to dictate how things are run in countries? That's crazy.
It's not a free market when it's a monopoly.
Hold on. When you have a free market, eventually
when you have a really
a
free market, but it destroys competition and therefore, like, what?
That's part of the free market. Part of the free market is shoring up all the resources so none of your competitors.
When did you become a laissez-faire?
I'm like, when did you become like the truest of the libertarians?
Yeah, no,
Brett goes.
Plot twist. We can compare a lot of the war in the Middle East with
there's a guy studying
with what the Cold War was for the generation before us, but the problems, much like with climate change, are going to be unique. The internet is going to be one of these huge problems where, though ISIS and Al Qaeda no longer have actual holdings geographically, they will have a presence online, and their reach will be further than what the Soviet Unions could have ever been in terms of reaching a populace, where they were constrained by how close to the U.S. border could they put those speakers for the Zimmerman telegraph. But
back to the Zimmerman.
It's always back to the Zimmerman telegraph. But instead, we can have one guy sitting in a cave in Pakistan with a mobile hotspot that can reach millions of people across this one block.
There was a whole communist party in America
There still is a communist party. But the radicalization that they're spewing is not equitable, I would argue. So, yeah, we can all take satisfaction in the fact that we've beaten ISIS. Pack it in, folks. Democracy has been achieved in the Middle East.
Yeah.
Mike Pompeo can finally get back on a flight. Mike Pence can finally get out of Israel. We've solved it.
God, I have so much I want to say about Israel right now.
Let's take a quick break. We'll get into Brexit and a little bit of the Mueller report when we come back.
A little bit.
So, welcome back to the pod, everyone. Our first topic for this intro sesh will be the Mueller report, which was released yesterday.
Big news.
Well, it was passed on. It was not yet.
Yeah, okay. And when we say released, we mean that
it was completed and it's under review by the chief of the Department of Justice.
Yeah.
The Attorney General.
William Barr!
Yep.
William Barr.
Bill B.
Ben,
Yeah.
talk about it.
I am so excited, guys. Do I think that good things are about to happen? Probably not, though. I tell everybody I've talked to about this so far, I want to believe strongly that Bill Barr is going to come in as the avenging angel of this story in history.
He won't.
And save the country, release the report, we'll find out everything bad that's ever happened, and he will save the nation. Do I believe that? No.
No. So for the past 22 months, Bobby Mueller has been over here formulating this report, doing the dirty work.
Him and his 13 crazy Democrats.
Yeah.
Angry Democrats, that's what it is.
The only real information we have is what we've learned from the indictments and the convictions.
It's astounding how tight of a ship has been run.
Yeah.
In this time of constant leaks and hot takes, we've heard nothing.
So it was officially passed on to the Attorney General's office on Friday. The Attorney General will dictate what is released to the public and what isn't, but odds are what we're going to learn from this is when Congress gets it, because most people with a security clearance in Congress should get the full report. So that'd be the Intel Committee, the Intel committees and things like that. Most likely they're going to subpoena...
I believe he said when he got it, we could get information about it as early as this weekend.
Yeah.
So we're literally living in hour to hour, day to day at this point.
Yeah.
When it comes out.
Yeah.
But don't be surprised when what we get as the general public is heavily redacted.
Heavily redacted.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's
information.
the thing, though, is that like every step of the way, there are different restrictions that can be put
Right.
upon.
Right.
At the end of
this.
the day, I'm
Like-
now much more invested and interested in SDNY than I am in Mueller, because I think that's
Yeah.
going to bring forth a
Yeah.
lot more
Well, I mean-
incriminating evidence about the man who runs our country.
And this is the big news. When Mueller said that when he turned over the report, he did not recommend any further indictments.
Right.
That's because every part of the investigation has been given to the Southern District of New York, the Justice Department, and the FBI. Basically because, you have things like the inauguration committee.
Does
fraud.
that fall under the purview of Mueller?
It did. Okay, no, but that has been that. I'm pretty sure
'Cause
that
that's-
all of these. This is the thing, though, is that all of these separate investigations have been spurred by Mueller giving them information.
Exactly.
So, like, these are
Which I have to imagine this report, it will not come out and be clean at this point. If so many other investigations have been sprouted just
Yeah.
from this
Well,
one inquiry, that
and
was supposed to be fairly well contained when it started.
Well, no, that's the thing, is that like they purposely have been giving away this information.
Yeah.
to
And I
start
think that
these
was part of his
investigations.
strategy, so that
Yeah.
I mean, we could talk about
Well, also the best thing is
we
the
could talk about
fact.
pardons out the
Yeah.
wazoo.
Well, that's
why this
that's
is going on.
that's also one of the reasons he's done this is because
SDNY, if
you
you're convicted in New York, you can't be pardoned.
he cannot be pardoned for crimes committed at a statewide level, only at a federal level.
Yeah.
So that's why Cohen's kind of screwed.
Well,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
Manafort.
And
Manafort was
Manafort.
charged with 22.
Oh, did you guys talk about Manafort?
We did.
Oh,
Yeah,
gosh.
he was charged with what 22 like felonies from the state of New York.
He
Got, like,
47
4
months
years, yeah.
plus 43 months,
well, that's
30
the-
of which can be
Yeah, but
or-
then he still hasn't been sentenced from all of his New York crimes. That was the
But he's gonna serve part of it concurrently, and that's a miscarriage.
But from the Mueller
call it a
standpoint,
miscarriage.
miscarriage of justice. Let me finish that. That's a miscarriage of
yeah,
justice.
Paul Manafort had a miscarriage.
It's so sad.
So the important thing with the Mueller report is that it's not going to, as we're kind of mentioning, all these things are being handed off to the right jurisdiction, because it's not like Mueller reaches a conclusion and says, I recommend articles of impeachment be drawn or anything like that. It's going to be here are the facts, here are what we learned, and then it's going to be up to Congress to do something about
I
it.
don't know. I think this is the closest thing I can associate with this is a mob investigation. I don't know if it's going to reach the guy at the top, because what we learned when Cohen came and testified is Trump separates himself, maybe not very well, but he makes a conscious effort to keep.
He's already been implicated. He is individual one.
I'm
He
so-
is the reason Cohen's going to jail.
I feel like the Mueller report's gonna end in Junior and Ivanka clearly have broken the law, but I don't know if it's gonna if we're gonna get a tangible link to the president, of which Republicans will be like, that's a smoking gun.
So the thing with all of this is we know that the Trump organization is just a poorly run criminal ring. And I don't
Yes.
think that Trump himself, based off of all the conversations, the meetings that we know that happened between Don Jr. literally and Jared Kushner using WhatsApp to contact
No
people,
one
Don,
walks behind Donald Trump's desk.
Yeah, for real. Don Jr.
On
calling-
multiple occasions, he said, "My son has the worst judgment in the whole world."
Yeah, Don Jr. was literally calling his dad when he was meeting with the Russian spies. So, like, there are going to
I'm
be
laughing
connections.
really hard.
Oh yeah, like
There were no back channels used to commit these crimes. They were
Man,
directly dictated to these
These are
people.
smart people.
Yeah.
They committed a smart crime.
So for the next however many weeks, Congress is most likely going to call Bobby Mueller up to the Hill to testify, to go through each and every
I
page of what's
doubt
going
any of
on.
those will be open door hearings.
I bet most of them will be.
What the biggest thing that I think what I really hope happens is that, and this happened back with the My Lai massacre in Vietnam. There was a junior senator who headed a subcommittee in which he was the only committee member, and he showed up he got hold of the My Lai report and then read it at a committee, which then makes it a public document.
Yeah.
And he read the whole it took him like hours and hours to do this, but since he was the
Well,
only.
That's kinda badass.
last year, Cory Booker had his Spartacus moment that everyone was talking about.
Yeah.
where he-
Okay, wait a second. They had already been released when he did that.
I know, but it
was kind of bad. The sentiment was.
to the same extent, though, of like congressmen have avenues to release this information to the public legally.
Yeah.
So yeah, don't be surprised when pages and pages and pages and pages of this, what I'm sure is just the world's lengthiest report, are somehow through back channels or publicly released, and we'll be able to speculate wildly. I don't think anything's going to happen overnight with this. So.
I'm real ready for Senator Nadler to come out and be like, oh, here we go. I'm to talk for a shit ton of hours.
Yeah. So there's going to be a lot to watch from this. So it's finally wrapping up, folks.
Finally wrapping up.
I want to say on record that I called this that it would be released this month last year, and I was really excited about that.
I guess moving on to a topic that we have
we've teased for so long.
We've teased for like 3 months now, and honestly, it's like a lot like life insurance. We waited. And now it's a really good thing because we have a lot to talk about.
I don't know if that's how life insurance works.
No, it is. No, just like life insurance, because it's now really cheap to purchase life insurance at the moment.
Yeah, sure. So let's talk about Brexit now.
Brexit.
So, and this is a topic that we've been teasing for months now. But it's it's like a fine wine. We've let it ruminate for so long that it is now at peak.
Quality.
We've had how many episodes now? You insist on doing these analogies that you
it's a good one. That one makes sense.
You don't know where they end up.
Oh my god, it's like a good Chianti. You gotta let it aerate for like 2 hours before.
Alright, I was gonna side with you before.
Man, it's like a fish market in the middle of San Francisco.
It's like a brisket.
God. Okay. All right. Anyways, so going into this, basically, a couple of years ago now, the UK decided to be real fucking stupid and vote to withdraw from the European Union.
Yeah.
So
via referendum.
Basically, yeah,
via
exactly.
popular vote of the people.
Which only passed by, I think it was like, what, 4 points? It was like 54% of the country voted for it.
54% of the populace.
But basically, which was
we can break that down by demographics though and see how that.
Scotland voted not to leave. Wales voted to leave because they're
Northern
inbreds.
Ireland voted not to leave.
Yeah, and then the United Kingdom was. No, excuse me. Then England, whoops, voted to leave.
They're not very united at the moment.
Yeah.
I got a question for you.
Yes.
If worse comes to worse and a no-deal Brexit happens, they build a wall between Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland.
Well, they already have a wall.
Well,
yeah, there is a wall. It's about yay high, but like there's a wall.
But a legitimate hard barrier between. All right.
Yeah.
Do you think we'll see another Irish?
You think the IRA is gonna?
Are we gonna have because that's seems to be generally the sentiment is a wall between the islands is the last straw. Is the worst possible outcome.
I think
people. I mean, there's people talking in the UK that, or I guess the no more UK, that if there's a wall or a barrier or any sort of preventative measure keeping separating the islands, that people will shoot at it.
Well, I mean, the reason they don't have like checkpoints at the border is because the IRA
People
just kept blowing them up. Yeah. So no, I don't think we're getting at that point. Yeah. But back to Adam's point, where are we at with Brexit?
So basically, as things have boiled down to now, and this is big because initially the United Kingdom was set to leave the EU on the 29th of March, which is of course
the 23rd.
Yeah, exactly, which is in 6 days. So anyways, however, the after a lot of happening of deals being rejected, and Theresa May basically failing to actually run a government.
Is this her third time that she tried to get it passed?
Well, no, we'll get to that. So basically, the EU basically has allowed them to extend Article 50, which is Brexit, until a later date. Until then, but however, that's very conditional. See, it's conditional upon what the UK does, because how this basically there's 7 ways that this plays out, and we will go through all of these.
7, damn.
Yeah. So basically, if the if the British Parliament further the vote on Theresa May's deal, then what that does is it basically then sets up a way for the United Kingdom to properly leave the EU under how the Theresa May has set this up. However, they've already shot this deal down twice. The other
forthcoming third.
Yeah. So basically, the second option, and it's not very likely that this will occur.
That her plan will pass.
Yeah, it's really not likely that will occur. So the second basically thing is if there is no deal struck. Then on the 12th of April, which happens to be my birthday, I know. Then the EU will officially lose the United Kingdom. on that day if there is no vote struck then. The third option is whether or not major renegotiations will occur. And this is basically between the EU and the UK. So if they seek some renegotiation and the EU allows it, then the Parliament will vote on a new deal. It will pass, and there will be renegotiation will be implemented, and the UK will leave. If the EU refuses to renegotiate, then basically what happens is there will either be a no deal, a general election in the UK, a vote of no confidence, which will then cause a general election, or a referendum on this to occur. And that basically then leads us into our 4 other options. So basically the EU could, or excuse me, the UK, because there's a lot of 2 letters going UK, together EU. Here, could pass another referendum. And what that would do would basically, it really throws into question what would be on the referendum in regards of like what the people would be voting on, because they could either vote on a non-binding referendum basically about whether or not they want to fucking leave again, which I think would, at this point, polling shows that the UK would vote to stay in the EU, or they could hold a referendum upon give it to the people about Theresa May's deal, which would then make the UK leave the EU with some kind of set way of and plans of doing this. However, this would have to be approved by the members of Parliament. So basically, if the referendum, if the members of Parliament agree to this, either the deal or staying or leaving, then that vote would occur, and whether or not then we'll see how things go from there. But if the MPs refuse that, then it basically just the government then has to consider other options that have been laid out. The 5th option is whether or not the UK and Theresa May would decide this, whether or not she wants to hold general elections, which would largely see the Conservative Party, the Tories in the UK lose power, and basically how that how that would go down with the government. Theresa May would call elections. Then 2/3 of members of Parliament would have to approve these general elections. If less than 2/3, then basically the government would have to go into a no deal, a renegotiation, a vote of no confidence, or a referendum. So our 6th option to go down here, basically you could have a vote of no confidence, which has been tried before by the Labour Party on the 16th of January. They did this. So basically how this would occur, there would be a vote of no confidence called. The vote would be taken up, and then every member of Parliament would vote whether or not to keep Theresa May and the Conservatives in power. If the government wins, then basically everything stays the same. If the government loses, then they would and whether or not there's a clear party that would then take over is the real question. Because if there is, then basically you have a new prime minister that would step in and a new government. If not, then they would go into they'd have 14 days basically to have a government, or to create some kind of coalition. And if that failed, then they'd have a general election. If it did succeed, then they would, have a government again. And basically, the 7th option then is a no Brexit would occur, and that's if the EU Court of Justice ruled that it would be legal for the UK to unilaterally revoke Article 50 to cancel Brexit without some agreement. And this basically would need an agreement of the 27 other United EU countries, but mostly they might have to have some kind of approval. But mostly this would be done through the courts of the European Union, and basically that would just nullify everything that has happened in the past 3 years. 3 or 4 years.
2016 happened right before our elections.
So basically, this is it's crazy, but those are the options that this comes down to. You see a lot of dissatisfaction with the ruling Tories, especially from the people, but also from members of Parliament. The last vote of no confidence literally won by 14 votes. Was all it was.
You just missed it by that much.
Yeah, and it's really what this it's very confusing. Basically because. The problem has been put off for so long. It's Theresa May negotiated this deal which no one likes, and basically because she pandered to some crazy conservative branch of her party, and even I'm blanking on his name now. I almost called him Jeremy Corbyn.
David Cameron.
Thank you, David Cameron.
So the gist, the upshot. Would you calm down? Thank you. The upshot of Brexit really is that either the government figures out a way, either Theresa May builds a coalition to get this passed, either she finds some sort of middle ground that
Parliament likes, or Parliament's going to kick her out, and it's not going to happen. Now, that's a pretty black and white thing, and considering it feels like a majority of the UK and a majority of the government doesn't want this to happen, most likely it's not going to happen. But how much further along are we going to get before we establish that? I really don't know.
It seems like we keep saying this probably won't happen, and every day we stray closer to a no-deal Brexit, which would fuck the entire world.
And I think that's the biggest thing that a lot of people don't understand is that there
How
is
bad a no-deal Brexit would be.
it's not that either they come to an agreement or just nothing happens. It's that they leave without an understanding of how they're leaving or why they're leaving, or what it means for them to be leaving.
There are people that will live and die on this decision.
So with a lot of this, I mean, there are horrible economic repercussions. I think you can spend a lot of time talking about how this is when democracy fails, when direct democracy fails, like things like referendums and popular votes, because the people are easily swayed and don't understand the intricacies and the complexities of a lot of these things. That's all good and fine, and we can have that elitist argument at some future point in time. But
I think there's just, we keep going back to or at least I keep going back to the continuing shift against globalism across countries.
Well, even
to
to reduce it down further than that, it's just the simplicity of people even now don't fully understand what Brexit means. And, I think at the end of the day, this is going to get worse before it gets a lot better. I think we're going to hit that deadline and there's not going to be a vote. And for whatever reason, the British people seem to have difficulty getting another referendum up because they have every right to have another referendum that says, hey, let's cancel this deal entirely and not leave the UK, or not leave the EU, excuse me, are too many acronyms. And they just have struggled to do that or been reluctant to do that.
The ambivalence is astounding.
It's really bizarre to watch.
Yeah. I think that some of the major things that we'll see play out in question is we've seen the consequences of far-right governments being played out in developing countries and that kind of thing. However, I think this neo-conservative anti-globalism wave that we have seen, especially across Europe, we are seeing
how that affects strong developed nations.
Oh yeah, but I think and this is and the United Kingdom is obviously the most developed nation by which this has pulled.
I'm alluding a lot to America.
No, I think so too.
Yeah.
I'm holding back some here, but I think that as far as a consensus of the people not wishing for this kind of anti-globalist conservative agenda being played out, I think that this is the first time we've seen a people having to reconcile with their consequences, with their decisions in electing such people.
Yeah.
Also, basically what I'm trying to say here is good job, Russia, because UKIP was funded by Russia.
It's almost as if there's been some sort of global campaign by the Russians.
Whoa! To do this!
Who would have guessed that the Russians have been interfering in elections? Crazy.
Interest in destabilizing Western democracies.
Yeah, no, and they've done a really good job because here, the three of us are here questioning whether or not the people of the United Kingdom are intelligent enough to vote directly upon policy.
They're not. No. We should be electing people who have the capacity to understand and have the desire to craft policies like this that achieve the legitimate interests and wants of these people. We should not be leaving it up to people to say, hey, I bet you're scared of brown people. If you leave the EU, there will be less brown people. Because then, this wave of anti-globalism, this uprising of nationalism feeds right into that. I mean, fear is one of the strongest political tools. And when we have these referenda that directly allow people to be influenced by fear-mongering and then create policies of fear-mongering that, hey, take 15 steps back in an effort to gain one step of, we feel more comfort because everyone in this country is white, you have a lot of, really, believe it or not, a lot of consequences that go along with that.
I don't agree with everything you just said, but the power of fear is definitely one of the biggest new things, I think, on the block in terms of politics.
Oh, it's not new? Benjamin, it's not new at all.
It's brand new. It's never happened before.
It's been around forever.
When we come back, we will be quickly covering our Midwest topics for the day, and then closing out our 18th podcast.
All right, so big news coming out of Kansas this week, y'all. Topeka finally got their shit together.
Well,
Kansas,
I don't know if their shit's
no, they finally got their shit together.
on this issue.
Yeah, this is really interesting. I'm going to take a slow walk through what happened because I think the politics of this is interesting. So on Thursday, on March 20th, Wednesday even, March 20th, the Kansas House approved Medicaid expansion, which has been a huge thing plaguing this very rural state for a long time. Medicaid expansion is basically where if a state agrees to expand the approval or expand the bracket for eligibility for Medicaid, the federal government will foot like up to 90% of the bill for what that would cost a state, because Medicaid is a federal program. But there are cost-sharing requirements for it that go between the federal and state. It's a whole complicated thing. But the moral of the story is Medicaid expansion makes it so where more people are eligible to receive benefits from Medicaid. This is a huge thing in liberal states, or even moderate states, or poor states even, where it allows more people to have access to health care, which drives down the cost of insurance, it drives down the cost of health care. The only thing is it requires the state to spend a little bit more, but again, they get their bill matched, or they get their contributions matched by the federal government. So it's a big contentious issue in a lot of conservative areas. The talking points about the concern are that it leads us closer to socialism, which would then kick people off private insurance. Okay. And everyone would be in the same socialized federal healthcare system.
Socialism will never rise in America.
Yeah, and there'd be death panels and all of these talking points we've seen. All of that is a gross mischaracterization and over-exaggeration. So Kansas being a very conservative state, we've had difficulty getting this passed. Coincidentally, we passed a bill in 2017 that went to Governor Brownback's desk, and he vetoed it. So we were able to form this coalition, this bipartisan coalition, to get it passed then. We've had difficulty with the emergence of a stronger conservative caucus that really is fighting it. So Governor Laura Kelly made it a big part of her platform to get Medicaid expansion passed. She had two bills, one in the House and one in the Senate, that both died in committee. So what happened on Wednesday was that there was a Republican bill that came to the House floor for debate, and there was actually a representative who came up with an amendment that gutted it and that replaced it with the language for Medicaid expansion. Well, the chair of the Rules Committee in the House took issue with it, noted that the amendment was germane under the title, which meant that the amendment would have been not closely enough related to what the title of it was. There was a vote on the ruling by the Rules Chair, and the House actually voted to overrule the Rules Chair on germaneness, which then started something like a 6 or 7 hour debate on the House floor. The Conservative Caucus came up with a bunch of amendments to basically poison it, which were unsuccessful. And surprisingly, a coalition of about 20 some odd Republicans joined with 40 some odd Democrats, and they passed this bill for Medicaid expansion out of the House. And it was an incredible fight because it really came out of nowhere. This was something that, if this coalition was established ahead of time, they kept incredibly quiet. No one knew this was going to happen. Otherwise, the Speaker would not have allowed this bill to come up before the floor. But I think it really speaks to, hey, guys, bipartisanship is not dead.
In Kansas.
And hey, if bipartisanship is alive in Kansas, it's alive everywhere else, folks.
Yeah, for real.
Because we had moderate Republicans see that Medicaid expansion is not what the talking point said it was. It's something that was going to help 5%, not 20%, 5% of Kansans get health insurance, be able to afford health care. It is also going to keep open rural hospitals. We just had the Horton Community Hospital closed down because they couldn't afford to keep the doors open. Medicaid expansion is something that would allow state resources and state revenue to be allocated to help keep hospitals in rural areas open, which is something these people drastically need.
I want this to come to Missouri so bad, just because we've seen so many rural hospitals close in the past 5 years.
Yeah, this is a really common issue.
It's a major issue plaguing the nation.
1 in 5.
How do we supply sufficient health care to just people who have a difficulty accessing even these facilities?
Right.
And it is reassuring to see at least somewhere they're moving towards this.
Yeah, it's promising.
I mean, after the Democrats' big fight on this and big messaging on Medicaid expansion across the board, I'm glad there's action.
Well, I think this is the biggest thing is like
I want more than
programs-
5%.
programs
I want the fifth.
Yeah. Well, I think, and the major thing is like things like Medicaid and Medicare and Social Security over the years have become increasingly popular.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like you can't take away these things without getting this kind of storm. We saw this even with the Affordable Care Act when the Republicans tried to repeal it.
Thanks,
like there
Obama.
are massive amounts of like people that once you give them this kind of like
access to healthcare.
Yeah, like these freedoms
Once you
that they
give them healthcare, they're healthier.
yeah, and they don't want it taken away.
And can participate in the economy more.
And
Whoa.
it's interesting because like we see places like Kansas expand Medicaid, but in Missouri we have bills being presented that attach work requirements to Medicaid and SNAP. Basically like supplemental food like programs.
We were fighting over that last month. Heck, in Missouri.
Yeah, thank you, Senator from Berry County.
Yeah, and I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. I mean, the Kansas House passing this bill is a huge step in the right direction.
What about the Senate?
There's so the way a bill becomes a law, it now has to go over to the Senate, and there is absolutely no guarantee that it'll pass the Senate. Senate President Susan Wagle, who is just inappropriately powerful in the Kansas legislature, is not a fan of it. So she potentially has the ability to single-handedly kill the bill. I'm not sure. The Kansas Senate is comprised of 40 members. I don't know the layout of who supports it, who's on the fence about it, and who could be won over. But again, it's the signaling that this is an incredible opportunity that they have, and I think it speaks overarchingly to, it's easy in light of how federal politics is playing out to kind of write off the conservative branch of the Republican Party as being anti-people and being, anti-rights and these kinds of things. But there are obviously still some issues that we have a lot of power in controlling the messaging over. Medicaid expansion was one of them. It was not that popular in 2016. It was something that some of the Democratic candidates were a little slow in the uptake, but now it's become a pillar. And I think the 2020 presidential cycle and election cycle is going to really cement a lot of these issues that some of our questionably progressive candidates were on the fence about, now become a pillar of the Democratic platform and become an expectation for a lot of people. Access to healthcare is becoming more of an expectation, less of this feared socialist program and more of, hey, it's really nice when you can go to the ER and not be bankrupt for the rest of your life.
That's important.
Yeah, we just want basic human rights, man. That's all we're really interested in.
When you can use an ambulance and have to sell your kidney
to
pay for that service.
Right. And this always goes into the overarching point of
brought to you by people with half a kidney.
As we see more of this adverse weather conditions, I myself wrecked in a snowstorm that was not that bad, but that could have, if I had to go to the hospital, that would have been devastating. I mean, a huge snowstorm just hit Colorado, and I have friends that got hurt in that. And again, hospital bills. Places out here where we live in rural Missouri, if anybody here, anyone who lives in Kirksville has to go to the ER, they're going to be in debt for probably the rest of their life. And that's just the reality they face. So things like Medicaid expansion help that to not be people's reality. You can be sick and still be okay at the end of the day. So that listen, I don't ask for much.
Yeah,
I just want that. I just want that for people.
I think that this would merit a really great discussion about, especially when we get more in the weeds about this, but the different healthcare plans that Democratic candidates for 2020 have posed, because there's two major consensus. I don't mean to go off terribly off topic here, but like you can see about most of the field has tied on to Bernie Sanders' Medicaid for All plan. People like
Elizabeth
Warren, as we mentioned, Bernie Sanders.
What's her face has been spouting eliminate the
New York. Come on, help me out.
Kirsten Gillibrand.
Gillibrand has been a favor of this.
Who wants to eliminate private health care?
Kamala Harris.
However,
then we also see this prevailing the other side, and I forget what it's called, but it's another way of doing this, and it's being proposed by Beto O'Rourke and Pete Buttigieg.
Single payer? Not single payer.
Not single payer.
That's Medicare for all. Medicaid for all.
But I think the biggest difference is, at least from my understanding of it, I mean, Medicaid for All would make it all one big government program. Single payer is, instead of paying an insurance company to then get medical treatment, you just pay directly into Medicaid or Medicare, which will then foot the bill for you. So in a sense, it makes it a federalized program in the hospitals and doctors are now being paid by the government instead of an insurance company. But and people criticize that as, oh, then the quality of care you get goes down because these people are getting paid less. It's like, well, no, your doctor just might not have his 4th vacation home, but he's still getting paid at the end of the day, and more people are being able to afford preventative health care, which means that it would make everything cheaper. The reason hospitals are going out of business is because they are still, I mean, legally they have to treat people. Well, they're treating people who don't have insurance, which means they're not getting paid, which means they're swallowing it, which means rural hospitals are closing. So yeah, again, your doctors might not be as rich as they once were, but when the free market takes care of things, everything gets adjusted anyway. Yes, we're stepping into the free market with a government program, but
Be careful.
Yeah,
where you tread.
Yeah, really. Holistically, preventative medicine and access to it makes the whole system a lot cheaper and a lot safer and a lot better for people in the long run.
So, anyways, this concludes all of our topics for this week.
Give us some closing thoughts, everybody. Let's go around the table.
All right, Ben, you start us off because we're going to throw you under the bus again.
I'm excited for next week and whatever comes out when this report comes out. I hope there's not more crazy weather events in the next 2 weeks, 7 days. We're going to have to deal with even more problems.
Yep. Brett, you're going to law school. Talk about it.
Yeah, I am officially enrolled in the 2022 class of Washburn University in Topeka, Kansas. So if you guys thought you were going to hear a lot about Kansas then, you're going to hear even more now. I'm excited. That's most I got.
Yeah, take the time to prepare for all this. Basically, the things I'm looking forward to. Motor racing season has really started back up. Ferrari is not looking as competitive against Mercedes as I was hoping in. Penske's looking real strong, but Andretti is definitely pulling up through the rear. And Techeetah is definitely not doing as hot as or consistently as I wish they were. God, and a lot of those things don't make any sense to you people. The 36% was founded, written, and directed by Adam Childers Arnold and Brett Combs.
Music in this episode, as always, was provided by Purple Planet. You can check them out at purple-planet.com.
The presenting sponsor of the 36% is Avian Apparel.
Our audio editing was done by Bert Crumbs.
Our ukulele muse, as always, is Adam California.
Our research and outline was done by Ben March to the C. Sherman.
And our scheduling was done by Yorkie Sherm.
Cover art for this episode was done by the wonderful Christian Ferguson.
Special thanks for the 20 the 20 Republican Kansas House members. You guys are really pulling through for us. So thanks for listening, everyone, and thoroughly hope you enjoyed this week back with the three amigos.
Yeah,
so, anyways.
Thank you so much. As always, I'm Brett.
And I'm Adam.
And this has been
the 36%.